Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Site-Specific Ecologies, with Rachel Rozanski and Tamara Abdul Hadi. This is part of Ecologies of Access, Disability and Arts in the Anthropocene. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, we are live from Fourth Space, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community. We help mobilize knowledge, we co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things happening across the university. We're running today's event as a live-streamed Zoom meeting. So those of you joining us there, if you have comments or questions, pop them into the chat. We'll do our best to get them up to our guests. And for those of you here in the space, if you have any questions or comments, just let us know. Raise your hand. We'll get a microphone over to you. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to a member of the AIM Lab and our moderator for today, Nick Goberdan. Welcome in.
Test.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Those of our lovely guests in person, as well as those online, thank you so much. Today's how we're going to go about today is I'm just going to give a brief introduction, and then afterwards we'll have our presentations and end with a Q&A. So to start off the first introduction, we have Tamara Abdul Hadi, and Tamara is an Iraqi photographer whose work is concerned with the historic and contemporary representation of her own culture in its diversity. Along with being a photographer, Tamara is an educator who has taught in Palestine, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, the UAE, Kuwait, Tunisia, and Canada. Her work has been published extensively in the mainstream media, though she now prefers to work for more independent entities. Her photography and commentary focus on the dispossessed and marginalized and the changing social and environmental landscapes of the Middle East. Her photographs have been exhibited worldwide. Abdul Hadi's debut monograph, Picture an Arab Man, was published in 2022. And our next presenter, Rachel Rozanski. Rachel is an interdisciplinary artist and PhD student whose creative research explores concepts of restoration and repair in environmental studies and disability studies. Though through residency projects in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Iceland, she has collaborated with researchers and have been inspired by scientific and land-based studies of permafrost degradation, pollution, and adaptations for the Anthropocene. Using drawing, photography, and video, Rachel portrays the creative survival of people, plants, and animals in sick bodies and sick lands, creating documentary art that is accessible and experiential. Her work has been exhibited in galleries internationally and across Canada. So those are the short bios of our participants today, and we'll begin with Tamara, please.
Hello, everyone. What's wrong? Oh, yeah. Before I begin the presentation, I wanted to first of all say that, well, first of all, thank you to everyone for being here. I want to say that this project is actually a collaboration between me and Roï Saade, but I'm here now representing the project as part of this event. So it's a project called وَأَسْقَيْنَاكُمْ مَاءً فُرَاتًا in Arabic, and Choreography of the Euphrates, which is a working title. Before I get into what the project is about, I would like to show you the journey that Roy and I have taken so far in the project. So it's a documentation of the Euphrates River in Iraq, one of two rivers that surround Iraq, the Euphrates and the Tigris. So this route that I'm showing is from northwest down to south of Iraq. And all of the spots that have been pinpointed are places that we photographed on this route. So we're photographing roughly 1,100 kilometers of river and communities that live by the river. So here we go down towards the south. This is an ongoing project that has been, that we started in 2022. So it's been 2 years in the process so far. So we begin from the top, northwest, which is near the border with Syria, and go down towards Al-Qurna, that last spot, which is where the Euphrates meets the Tigris River. So I will read this. This is a project exploring the Euphrates River in Iraq through photography and counter-cartography with a post-colonial and post-conflict lens. An intimate investigation of a river through its communities and socio-cultural landscape, this project is an attempt to counter-map the entire course of the river in Iraq, documenting its curves, splits, estuaries, and its ever-changing ecology, along with its inhabitants, all the while challenging the prevailing decades-long perception of the country, shaped by a lens of conflict, violence, and insensitivity. It's important to mention that so I'm originally Iraqi, but I never lived there. I was born into the diaspora, and I only started interacting with the country through my photography in a little bit in 2011, but mostly in 2018. And this has been a way for me to, in a sense, re-understand and reconnect with the land. And going with Roï as my partner for this project has really been a very personal experience and very important to me. So I just also want to say that because it's part of me and who I am. So as I continue here in the presentation, there's one thing that I think about that it's important to show, which is when we think of Iraq, or when a lot of people think of Iraq, they always think of the visuals that are associated with it from the Gulf War or from the American invasion, and those are the kind of images that are still on Google when you search a lot of the cities and towns that me and Roï went to. And it just, it's a driving factor, I think, in this project in terms of going back and visualizing it and representing it through photography. I don't want to look at these images, but I also think it's important to see how present they are in the search engine, for example. These are also places that we went to that have these images. And it's really crazy because we've been to these spots and we've seen these places, but then when I look up the images and I see the army and the soldiers, it's quite effective. So that was an introduction into what why maybe why the project is, since these are presentations of work in progress, I wanted to bring the audience into seeing that the direction and the process into it. So when we started photographing, we photographed with having the geotagging or the GPS with each image, and that was really important to us to make sure that we can continue on a route that we would know exactly where we photographed. So in the beginning, we had the geotag exact map. I guess, what do you call them? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so the point is, that's how we photographed it in the beginning. So we had these images and we had exactly where we photographed them, and we wanted to make this as part of the counter mapping or the mapping that we were doing. So that was the beginning of the project. And we named them the geotag of where the photo was taken. After the first part, we continued and started thinking about how we wanted to represent the mapping, or how we wanted to represent where the photos were taken. So for example, this is a visual of a place that we photographed, Rawa, which is on the last spot that we got to on the map, which is on the way. It's about 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers from the Syrian border. And we chose an image to represent that place at this moment while I'm sharing it with you. So for example, this is an image that we chose for Rawa. This is an image that we chose for Ana. And for example, I showed you earlier an image of a US soldier in Ana. So this is sort of, you know, a counter representation of that. And so here you see the place where we photographed it, which was Qadisiyya Lake. And in the background is exactly where it was photographed. It's a zoomed in part of the map of that exact spot along the river. So with each image, and we're still working on the mapping. We're still thinking about how to present it. This was our first trial, I would say. So this, for example, this image is in an area or an isle called Hawijat Alus. And if you look on the curve of the river, there's a small isle in the curve, and that's where this photo was taken. And this is a place that we went to on the route. So we continue here showing you some images. This is Haqlaniya. This is an image taken in a in a hot, well, it's a natural spring that's hot in the winter and cold in the summer. This is Haditha. So a lot of these places were difficult to get to because of the most recent, I would say the most recent security issues there was because of ISIS, and they had occupied these areas in 2014, 2015, and they were moved out in 2016. And so it was difficult to get there, and it took us actually a couple of years to get permission to go to these specific areas, because they are just very much more secure and closed because of what they experienced. So this is in al-Baghdadi, and al-Baghdadi was very difficult to get to as well because the US Army has a very large base there. So this was one of the reasons why, for example, this place was very difficult to get to, but that is not what I imagine when I think of where the US Army base is. When I see what a beautiful landscape this is that a lot of people can't really get to and can't really get to experience because of these issues and difficulties that have been that the place has seen. This is in Al Dulab. So we met a lot of people along the way. We photographed a lot. We got a lot of oral histories. We got a lot of stories regarding living by the river, how their experience was as a child growing up by the river, how it is now, the kind of work that they do. And we plan to have all of this information that we've learned, all of the oral histories and all of the video and photography that we've gathered to be part of this online digital atlas that we want, or we're in the process of creating. For people to be able to travel that route or understand that area, with the information that we have gathered and continue to gather, plus have it be open source to Iraqis in Iraq and the diaspora, also academics, environmentalists, people that want to learn more about these areas that are more difficult to get to. Iraqis that are from these places, for example, that have never been there. I have some friends from Hawijat Alus, their family. We have some Rawi friends from Rawa, whose ancestors are from there, but we're not able to, not really even get there, but visually imagine it, for example, today. Oh, there you go. This is a river called Habbaniya. Well, actually, it's a lake called Habbaniya Lake, which I believe I've heard stories of my parents swimming there and going there, and in the 70s, I think. Ramadi. Also Ramadi. This is a visual of trying to get to the river from a town, and it had all of these reeds overgrown, and it was difficult to get to the actual river from inside this town. So we had to climb under and into the reeds to be able to get there, brought by someone from the neighborhood. And so a lot of times we would be somewhere and we would meet someone and we would end up spending the day with them, and they would show us how to do stuff that they do, or experience, or tell us stories about the place. And so this was one of those. There's a lot of videos that we've taken that we're still thinking about how to include as well into the project. But this one, for example, just shows you this little journey that we had to go through to get to the river, and how they do that every day. This is a, so at some point we met this man who came with, being led by his son because he was blind, and took us into his palm grove and gave us a really amazing tour and walked us around. And then here he was basically telling us that if you break, get the pit out of a specific fruit and break the pit, inside that pit is something that looks and tastes like an almond. And so he was explaining that first to me and then to Roï. And we did have the inside of the pit, and it was amazing. And then we discovered that the same story, or the same fruit has the same story in Lebanon, but it's called something else, right? Another, or I think this is, I will end with this, is showing this really amazing 12-year-old girl on a jet ski that really wanted to show me how amazing she could jet ski. And this was on Hawijat Alus, which was that small isle. And so yeah, so I filmed her and I sent her the videos, and we're friends on Instagram, which is also this amazing new, because I've been doing this I've been documenting as a photographer for a very long time, but recently, now that everybody has, or a lot of people have internet and Instagram and access to these things, a lot of times now I'm connected with people that I photograph that I never would have been connected with before, and stay connected with them and able to show them the work that we're doing, and able to get their the consent is there, but just their support in the work that we're doing, because we're not just doing this work for ourselves. We're also, we're doing it mainly for, it's for us, it's for the people around us, it's for people like my parents, and it's also for them. So you hope that you can keep that connection going. That's it for me. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for the amazing presentation, Tamara. If there's any questions, please remember to write them down, and we'll have a Q&A towards the end. Next, we have Rachel Rozanski.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Tamara. That was lovely. So I'm just going to start with a little about my past work, because I was thinking about some connections I hadn't made yet when I was working on this, but how it kind of led me to what I'm showing here. My first time in the Arctic, which is where a lot of my work before was based, I was on the Canada C3 expedition, which was going along the coast of Nunavut at the time. And along with a team of researchers, we were studying, there were a lot of abandoned settlements, and some were missing entirely. And that's because permafrost degradation has been going so much faster than the predictions about it. And with this shoreline disappearing and these chunks falling away, when I was living in the Arctic later, I could see it quite literally happening, pieces of land falling away from communities, and communities shrinking back. And this idea of the land shrinking, this livable space that people can inhabit and animals can inhabit literally shrinking, is really something that mimics how, for instance, chronic illness and disability creates a scaling down of usable space. and this is explained by Arceli Dakumachi in Activist Affordances. But it's not something I put together at the time, but it's such a natural comparison in hindsight. So that sort of, where's the clicker? Thank you. That sort of led me, in a way, to what I'm working on now. And I'm looking at these relationships, potential relationships between environmental change and quote-unquote invisible illness in the Anthropocene. This is a work in progress. Everything I'm showing is a work in progress. But I'm looking at these ideas of disability and adaptations for survival from an ecological perspective in sort of the context of planetary disablement and that idea of shrinking of accessible space, but also just general illness in different ways. And actually, I'm going to continue. Yes. So I'm looking right now at the Toronto Portlands, and that's a peninsula off of Lake Ontario. It's off of downtown Toronto, but it's right there, and it's in Lake Ontario. And it was once a wetland. It was actually the biggest wetland in the area, and it became sort of a toxic mass of land built up out of the city's industrial waste. It's where all of the city's industrial waste went. It was funneled to, and it built up into basically an island. And it was heavily industrialized and then partially abandoned. And now these large areas have been left unattended, and it's been overtaken mostly by plants and animals, but also by all these different activities like cruisers and yacht clubs and abandoned buildings full of bats and covered in seagulls. And now this is a very potentially valuable piece of land, but they can't use any of the land technically because it is toxic. So it's sort of in this stalemate. So in a process they're calling naturalizing the Portlands, the city's moving 2 million cubic meters of contaminated soil and replacing it with clean fill. And it's a process that'll take decades. It's like the biggest undertaking of this kind that's happened in Canada yet, and it'll take, decades. And I'm so interested in this idea of an act of moving contaminated earth away, just it's moving it somewhere else as an act, a foundational act for a restoration process, because it's only contamination displaced, right? It's moving it elsewhere. So to explore this, I'm taking a very interdisciplinary approach. I'm looking at, oh, sorry, I'm missing a slide. I'll stay here. I'm taking a really interdisciplinary approach. I'm looking at it through geology and disability studies, sort of to ground my practice as a documentary artist. And with one of my committee members, Patricia Corcoran, who's an earth scientist and geologist, I've started doing class counting of the conglomerates that make up the area, because the origins of the rocks on this beach is over 70% manufactured material. It's sort of all these different things broken down from the industrial waste, concrete and glass and smelt and all these things. So one point that really stood out to me when I was starting to do this research is that there's a real definition between the Portlands and the Leslie Spit. And I'll just go back to, my map. So here, there's a portion that's the Leslie Spit and a portion that's the Toronto Portlands, but they're all made up of the same material. It's a very small area, and it's all covered with these miles of rebar and rubble beaches, but the Leslie Spit was designated a park in 1995, and almost overnight, this side of this peninsula became treasure. And I think about this often happening with time, like sea glass worn down over decades. Or we can imagine, these geological futures where plastics are appearing in the striations of mountains, and we talk about the Anthropocene in these sort of grand futuristic ways. But here, it happened almost overnight with the declaration of this pile of industrial waste being named a park. And suddenly, with this new title of urban nature, it had access to resources, like rideshare bikes were installed, research stations were set up, to monitor and manage bird populations and other populations. Paved paths and manicured trails were made, and now the park is accessible. So all these things happened, and the only actual thing that changed about this piece of land is our idea of it, the idea of it in our minds, and the technical idea of it in city planning. You can see here, there's a document I found in the Toronto Archives that shows early plans for converting the spit into the park, including illustrations of the environment. But I loved this. It was so weird to me because it also shows how this figure, this little man that's in every picture, it shows how he's supposed to feel in each place as they build them up and change the shape of it. My favorite is spiritual awe down here on the bottom right. Because nothing about this land changed to make it natural or clean or cured, but the value of it changed with this reassignment. So now there are birding groups that visit, exhibits about the urban jungle that is the Leslie Spit, and the coyotes and cormorants are culled. They're killed, and the populations are controlled. Pesticide notices are installed through the summer. I was told off last time I visited for collecting the rainbow-colored stones covering the beaches on the spit, when a few meters away, the same toxic beach content is still garbage. It's still being removed and replaced as part of this naturalization project, meant to really, in essence, cure this industrial wasteland. And right now, that is a place where coyotes, birds, plants, and people are living and thriving, really in many ways, in untracked populations. So this will be eradicated in a way to remove and refill that land. And it's a place where nobody's allowed to live technically, but we do. I lived here in 2018 and 2017, and I started this project really kind of by accident. I was just walking around, and everywhere I went, I could smell dead things. And I didn't know why. So I started investigating why there were so many deaths on this land, really. But because it's the foundation for the populations that live there now, they're only allowed to live there because this land isn't developed. And at the same time that I was living there and doing this project, I was developing chronic illnesses. And while I was looking for medical care, I was following these different attempts to heal the Portlands. And I really, while these are not literally the same, I noticed a lot of ties between the two, and more in the concepts of health and cure and repair. And since the contaminated land can't be disposed of, only moved, here I was thinking a lot about how these Western colonial imaginaries of restoration and repair often inadvertently work to create these sort of idyllic bodies and landscapes. So I was using the washing of the Portland soil, or the removal of it, as a case study, like a metaphor for cleansing the body. Can I play the video? Here we go. For instance, the largest colony of double-crested cormorants in North America nests here. They ended up choosing this space, finding this space, because before this they were actually at risk because they were repeatedly culled from lands used by people. They're kind of a pest in a lot of ways because their poo kills everything it lands on. But here, because nobody cared about this land, they were allowed to exist in these huge numbers. And they're kind of confined to this space that increases their health hazards, but they've improvised within these limits in a way, using waste materials to their advantage and actually developing specific adaptations, biological adaptations to survive in this place. For instance, one documented one is that they've developed a really strong interest in blue plastics. So last time I went, I found a bunch of $5 bills there and other things. And they specifically put plastic on the inner layer of their nests, and it looks like they're using it to insulate the eggs, which is actually very clever. So I'm interested in how this sort of evolutionary change and these adaptations sort of reflect disability representation in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of these adaptations for survival emerging that we can enact within these constantly shifting limits that are becoming more urgently relevant in times of environmental decline, when there's a general scaling down of using usable space for people and animals and everyone in general. And I'll just continue. Here we go. So I'm just going to briefly mention that talk about fantasies of identification, which can span across fields, but Ellen Samuels talks about this in regards to disability, gender and race as well. And she talks about how the evolution of the terms natural and normal are used to justify, for instance, eugenics projects, and also destructive environmental ones in the 19th century. Eli Clare also talks about this, explaining that it's an ideology that's sort of seeped into every corner of white Western thought and culture, and cure as an idea rides on the back of normal and natural. And Eli Clare actually moves between the terms cure and restoration, pointing out just how interchangeable they are. So as the amount of contaminated land worldwide keeps growing, I'm really interested in these idealized visions of repair or cure and the landscapes that are produced out of them. So if cure is the restoration of health, just as there's a broad range of things that can be considered health, like, fad diets and other things. Health is a very broad term. You could take it in a lot of different ways. So just like that, restoration is also an umbrella that does not really define the motive or outcome. And that it sort of requires, though, digging into the past and trying to replicate that in the future. And as Eli Clare says, the end results rarely, if ever, match the original state. So the goal can be to recreate a landscape frozen in time, or it could be to create dynamic and self-sustaining ecosystems out of what's possible in the present. And even where that isn't possible, the desire to return landscapes to the previous state is built into the etymology of the word restoration, so it's hard to separate those. I'll just finish up with saying that looking at these issues through a disability lens, or using it as a lexicon to map out techniques and adaptations that are acts of resistance to sometimes violent moves towards cure, can sort of be a way to examine like the process of healing human bodies and restoring sick lands. Because although those two things are very different, they can come about through similar cultural fantasies of restoration that aim to reinstate bodies and lands to a very particular picture of health. So in this, I'm looking at where these concepts of cure can be violent when it also means eradication. And in the same way that ableism is carved into urban planning, dominant ideas about land shape the land itself. And in both these instances, human imagination acts as an ecological force, for good or for worse. Yeah, I'll end there.
Perfect. Thank you, both of you, for the presentations. A lot of interesting ideas here. And yeah, maybe we can open up the questions. Is there anyone who has a question here?
So when you were sharing your project, I was curious to know when you'll be, whenever it's an exhibition or online, will you be sharing also like the stories of each person? And can you tell us, let's say, maybe one or two stories? Because I was curious to know a bit more about the people.
So that is actually something we've really been thinking about. And I think that that's how such a presentation can be useful, because it's work in progress. The stories have always been something that's such a part of the project, that's maybe the heart of the project. And every time we've shared it, we've had feedback from people saying these stories are really important. And so we consider how to share them. We're still thinking about what's the best way to present them. They can be presented maybe in, as you go through the map, maybe if you go to the town and you find out about this one story, how do you learn about it from my point of view? For example, would you rather that, or would you rather hear the person talking about his story? We have a lot of stories that are our favorites, I think. One of them maybe is when we were looking to go to that small isle. We were on a bridge, and these two guys came on the back of a motorcycle, brothers, and they were both on the motorcycle, and they were both deaf, and they told us, what are you doing here? Do you need anything? And we said, actually, we're looking to go to this isle, and we're doing this project, because we explained this to everyone. We're documenting the river and its people. And so they said, oh, come with us. And so we got in the car and we followed the motorcycle, and they took us to the isle where they were from. And they brought us to, it's really hard to also describe. When we arrived, we walked down a path that ended up into this beautiful riverside, almost like a beach resort. And it was a bunch of families, and they were all by the water. It was like entering into a dream world that we wouldn't have imagined that we would even be invited into. And then we met these two brothers' brother, and then their other brother and their children, and one of them, and a lot of them actually were deaf. And one of them was the father of the girl on the jet ski. And so most of that period of time, when we were there for maybe a couple of hours with them, I spent a really good amount of that time photographing all of the young girls, because they all wanted their photographs taken. So I became almost like a portrait photographer. I set up and they just kept all coming. And then I sent them all their photos. And I think what's so amazing about this moment is that it's so hard to show this experience. Even photos, I don't even think we took that many photos there, other than the portraits I did of the girls, which I don't even think I want to share, because they were in a way for them. And when we talk about it, we say, like, do we have a great photo from that? And we can't find an amazing photo, because I guess we were in it and we were experiencing it. And at the same time, it's how do you tell the story without telling the story? How do I show you the experience without? There was also this moment where they came and they said to Roï, do you want to ride the jet ski? And he's like, yeah, sure, why not? And so he got on the jet ski, but they didn't let him go alone. So you were on the front and someone was hugging you from the back, right? It was such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I still consider, how can we share this kind of experience so people can, yeah. And so that's probably one of the favorite stories. And such an important question. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for your beautiful presentations. I just had a question for both of you about how you were, when you were thinking about the project or starting it, why you were drawn to the water, or like those places along the water, or like the shoreline, and kind of what kept you coming back to that place, and how being attentive to that sort of not just one site, but like a durational sort of relationship to that place. How was that for you, and how did you, like, what brought you into it, I guess?
Thank you for that. I like that connection between our work, actually, the water. For me, when I was starting this project, I didn't realize it was a project yet. I actually felt like a conspiracy theorist because I was like, there's something wrong with this place. And I hadn't figured out what yet. But I was going back to the water all the time, partly because as I was in a lot of pain, and in the water helped, but I was going into this really disgusting water, to be honest. And every time I went back to the same beach, there were different dead animals there. But I also appreciated the beach for what it was. So there was kind of a parallel there in that this place was making me feel better, but probably also making me worse. And that was probably the experience of everything and everyone living there in some way. So that was my first draw to it. Besides that, I think I've always been really interested in waterways. I grew up partly on an island, and I always sort of come back to that because water is always recycling things and replacing things so quickly. It's almost an accelerated sample of change, I feel. Yeah.
I think for me, the connection goes to, I mean, for me personally, it can go back to also being born near water as well, which is in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and always spending time in the sea. But then years later, a lot of the work that I do has to do with photographing around the sea. In Beirut, for example, I photograph a lot by the sea. And since I collaborate with Roï on this project, he also has a lot of interest in photographing by a body of water. And I think with every creative project, we get obsessed with something. And so both of us, in a sense, were obsessed with photographing around a body of water. And it was around that time when we went to the Iraqi marshes, the wetlands in southern Iraq, for a project that I had started. And that was the first real experience being near a river in Iraq. And I think that created this thing within also Roï, because he was curating something and it was about a river, and he got obsessed with that too, that it became this idea where Roï said, let's apply for a grant to photograph along the river in Iraq. And I said, okay. So we applied for the grant and we got the grant. And we're like, oh, okay, now we really have to do this because we got the grant. So now it's serious. Think about why you're doing it. What because it's an effort. It's such an effort also to go to the country, to connect with people. It's not just it's a lot of effort to document such a wide, large space, which is a very ambitious project. And I've told Roï a few times when we tried to get the permission and we couldn't last time. I said, you know what? It's okay. We're having difficulty with accessing this. Let's just forget about it. Let's just take a break, because it takes so much, not just in terms of the physical being there, but also emotionally and mentally, and going to a place which is where your ancestors are from, where your family grew up, and that has a lot of difficulties, and going there and trying to experience it differently. I think I sidetracked to your question, but it's really became very much something since 2018 that was interesting to me, and to Roï, and it became something that drives us. And when you start something, also you want to see it through. So you want to do as much and the best you can until you finish what you are doing and then present it in the best way you can. So we're there now. We're in the process where we've done the documentation and we want to present the work in the best way we can. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Are there any questions online?
Not yet, but this is a good reminder for anybody who would like to ask a question. Just feel free to use the raise hand function and we'll call on you to turn on your mic and video, or you can feel free to type it in the chat and we'll read it out.
If people are still preparing their questions, I have 2 questions actually for the both of you, 1 question each. We can start with Tamara. I had this question that maybe I seen it wrong because of the glasses, Tim, but I believe I seen a pomegranate at one point in time. And I was wondering that I liked how it was, I believe the word is like superimposed on the image of the background as you track the river. I'm curious about why you had selected that image, as well as you had mentioned this word reconnecting, and it wasn't connect, it was and I don't know if that was like intentional, but if you can speak on like what kind of connection is happening, especially when you see the pomegranate, and what does that mean overall?
It was a pomegranate. So reconnecting, I say because because there's a connection, but it's not really a connection. It's more of a childhood memory in Baghdad, and then it's my memory, and the memory that's being, you know, because our memories are also things that we imagine, and so a lot of stories from my family and my parents create those memories that feel like they're real, but they're not, I guess. And at the same time, okay, so it's me reconnecting with the country, or trying to go to places that I'm from, or I feel I'm from, or I think I'm from, kind of. So it's question, really, it's a question, and there's no answer, there's only trial, which is the trial of reconnecting. And actually, the pomegranate is, that image of the guy holding the pomegranate was another story, where once we were photographing or talking to this boat maker, and all of the sudden we turn around and there's this guy standing holding a pomegranate. Literally the way that it was photographed was the way he was holding it, and he was offering us pomegranate. So obviously, as photographers, we photographed it first, because it was such a beautiful offering. I think Roï too was a bit speechless because of the visual of this man just offering us a pomegranate, like in an open pomegranate. He didn't give us a pomegranate. He opened it and presented us with the pomegranate seeds, which is so thoughtful, right? Yeah, and so no real connection, really much deeper than that. But it's the offering of the pomegranate, and maybe the offering, our work, and I feel that about most of my work is it's an offering, and you can do with it what you like. You know, if you like to have the pomegranate, you can. If not, you can also just look at it, and hopefully it's something that isn't overwhelming to you, whatever the offering is of the work. Yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, that answers the question. Thank you so much also for sharing that beautiful story. Thank you for that. I don't see any hands up. So Rachel, I'll ask you the question here. At one point in the conversation, you had mentioned that while you were walking past this water, you were smelling like a lot of these like dead things, and it's kind of this curiosity to figure out what is it. You had also mentioned that you were ill at the same time. I'm curious of where do you position yourself in this conversation? When you go to do your research, are you like using your own lived experience as a way to like understand these kind of relations between disability, cure, restoration? Like, where do you see yourself in that conversation?
Yeah, I think I can't help to. At the time, I actually was not thinking, I'm sure I was thinking of it that way internally, but it wasn't part of the work I presented, because I was starting to look at this work as a potential photo book or something. And it wasn't until later, when I started my PhD and I was reading Arceli's work and other things, that I really made that connection. But I think probably my interest in the first place was because of that. I don't think I would have been drawn to this topic in the way that I was if I wasn't going through that. And I wouldn't have physically been there either. I wouldn't have been going to the water every day. I wouldn't have been going through this process. So I think, that's just a reminder of the inevitable subjectivity of everything we make. But yeah, I think I do see this work as very personal, even though I'm not physically in it, but I don't think we have to be. So, yeah. Thank you.
Well said. Do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, this one's also not fully formed, but again, I'm always thinking about your work together because you're on this panel together, I guess. And I really like how you both navigate this kind of sort of violence with something beautiful or something possible. And I just would love to hear both of you talk more about that. Tamara, you haven't talked about it, but a lot of the people that you've interacted with have disabilities, and I don't know if that's related to the war as well, which also maybe is a connection. But yeah, like what is the possibility of like confronting this violence or replacing it or sort of playing with it and finding something else that I don't know.
That was so beautifully said, and also I don't think I need to reply to that because you really articulated. You said it was not fully formed, but actually it was very well articulated, and I really love how you saw that work also in connection with both of us.
I guess that's my reflection of it or how I'm
Yeah.
getting, but I was just wondering if you could maybe talk about how that feels or why that's important in like a way that's specific to your project. It's not the same for both of you, so yeah.
Do you want to go first? Sure. I love your questions, Alva. I think actually that's one of the things I'm struggling the most with this project, and the reason it's not finished is because if you were to just look at the visuals, I think, for instance, I have all these photos of nests full of plastic. Well, we've seen that 100,000 times, and we know how we're supposed to feel about it. And that's my problem, is that when I talk about it, it's a very different thing from the images alone, because there's already this huge, there's this narrative about what that is. It's bad. So I think the complexity of what you brought up is the thing I'm struggling with the most, and that sort of dichotomy of being in a place that can be beautiful, is beautiful, and allows us to exist there, but also is making us sick or dangerous or whatever it is. There's not a lot of room always for that duality, but that's the fun thing to explore.
Yeah, the duality is there, and it's clear, like, I think in both of our works. There's no doubt, it's inevitable that there is a lot of violence around, or has been around, Iraq and around that river, for example, the whole route of the river down. Experiencing different towns and places and people, and hearing stories of things that they've experienced in those places are very shocking also, in terms of the contrast of sitting, for example, in a beautiful palm grove and hearing about something that happened not too long ago that's not that far away. But that's also part of the reality of that region, the region we call home. At the same time, you try not to be reactive in the work you do. I mean, I try, because when I first started as a photographer, I was very reactive. I want to show the different side, all that. But you can show it without being reactive anyway, or doing it in a way where you can show a beautiful garden filled with flowers. This woman we went to, for example, she took me on a tour of all of her flowers, which she doesn't know me very well, but I love flowers. And that was a dream tour for me. But in the middle of the tour, telling me about her flowers, she told me about, she's like, you see that house over there? That house was, our neighbor in that house was taken by ISIS and he never came back. And she's like, in that house, that guy committed suicide. It's like all of these things that were so dark, but so much part of the reality of that place. And then she continued showing me her roses, and it's very interlinked, and hard to get away from. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's any questions online.
No.
Are there any final thoughts? Oh, we have a question from Julie.
Do we have a question from Julie?
Julie, if you'd like to turn on your mic, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. It had to give me permission to unmute. I'm going to stay off camera, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this presentation. I have a question for the second speaker, whose name I'm not remembering at this moment. I'm curious. I'm trying to think how to formulate this question. For context, I work in the nature connection field with a focus on nature accessibility. And we're always talking about the healing benefits of nature for us, for humans. And there's a big focus on showing the beautiful side of nature because of how it benefits us. But after seeing this presentation, I'm now wondering if we are reinforcing ableist ideas about beauty, if we are focusing on only showing the beautiful pictures and videos of nature within, nature photography, nature connection work. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. I think, I'm not trying to sound like some huge pessimist here about the natural world. I think it's valuable to interrogate capital N nature as a concept. It's more than just nature as in the outdoors. It's a whole concept within Western colonial thought, and it's been used in a lot of maybe negative ways to enact colonial projects. And besides that, I think it's built up into this collection of images. I mean, for instance, I didn't say this, but when I was working on my project in the north, my first video footage I'd only taken in the summer. And I went back and a lot of critique from peers and professors, everyone was, where's the ice, where's the snow? This isn't it, you need to go back and get that. And it's this collection of images built up in our minds of what makes up nature, what is this environment. And if it doesn't match that, then it's there's sort of a disconnect of values there sometimes. So I think that, anyway, it's just, especially if we're talking about the Anthropocene, I think there's sort of a need to reevaluate what we consider nature, natural, and really interrogate those terms, because there is no environment left without plastics in it, for instance. I mean, and what is the Portland's nature, is the area Tamara is looking at natural. So yeah, that's all. It's very complex, though. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Julie, and your answer, Rachel. Is there any other questions? I see one in the chat. I don't know if that was from the comment earlier.
It's a comment from Georgie Duram, who's saying, thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you for being here. If there's nothing else, going once. Roy, you have a question? No, we're good? Yeah. Right on.
I'm going to ask Rachel. Hi, Rachel. So I'm interested to know a bit more about the port, mainly the site that suddenly became such a luxury park to visit, and I'm interested to know how the city itself promoted the park, and environmental activists or anyone who, if engage with this, and how did they turn so fast something that is toxic to something purified and naturalized? Is it the same way they're trying to do now? Or I don't think so, because the other one was fast. And is there any reported sickness and human interaction with toxic that has been documented there? And last one, are people allowed to swim in the water, or were you doing it illegally?
Thank you, Roy, for that. Like 6 questions. So yeah, I think there's signs up saying don't swim, but it's also because the beaches on the Leslie Spit, they didn't clean anything up. They did put in walkways and these other things and researched all of that, but it's not cleaned up at all. The beaches are full of rebar. When I go swim there, I have to, I mean, well, I definitely have my tetanus shots. But it's not, it's not cleaned up at all. It's just, the reason actually is, I'm a little hazy on this, but the city was going to close it off and use it for industrial purposes, and then people sort of rebelled because I think, as often happens when these things are left long enough, the community sort of adopted this space back and went, no, we like it that way. That's like, they sort of take pride and ownership of this place of ruin. And so that's why it became a park, is people fought for it and environmentalists fought for it, which is kind of interesting because this place was just left alone long enough to grow some trees and have people want to go and use it. So there's that, but really nothing else about it changed. And nobody's allowed to live there still. It's a park, so they kind of go around it that way. And I think the Portlands are being quote unquote naturalized because eventually I'm sure they'll want to use it to have people live on it, to sell the land, and they can't. So yeah, I'd say that. Oh, disease. Not that I know of. I think probably that would be hard to document because nobody lives there, so it's just visitors, but I'm sure, yeah, I think they would get around any legalities because of the signage. Don't swim here, don't blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah, so it seems like we're good now. Thank you for all the questions. And yeah, that concludes our conversation today. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation and presenters for your amazing job today. And that concludes everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming in today for this conversation, and thank you, everyone online, for joining and also for your questions. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just a quick reminder, this conversation remains available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit it. And feel free, and you should be encouraged to stick around. There will be a part 2 of the photo book workshop this afternoon, and then tomorrow we will be having a artist talk part 3, this time with Diego Bravo and Prakash Krishnan. That's at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Hope to see you then. Thank you. Bye.